Hello coders, welcome to episode 164 of the How to Code Well podcast. Today I want to talk about what has surprised me, what I've learnt in the Kubernetes world over the last 3 or 4 months as I've been working on the deployment stage of howtocodewell.net. And before we get to that though, let's talk about some of the change logs. So the stuff that I've been working on since the last time we did the podcast. And we will start with some of the Kubernetes work. The cron jobs that I mentioned, the experiments that I've been running, they're actually running quite well, and they've been running for the past week. They have essentially been small little containers that run on a schedule that do certain things on the platform. I won't talk about what they do, but they're working quite well. I had all sorts of problems around the scheduling of things. The containers weren't really working very well to begin with, and the way in which the Kubernetes language in the YAML was just a little alien to me when I did that, but now I'm getting used to that. There's 2 types of jobs. There is a cron job with Kubernetes, which is a scheduled job. It runs on a schedule, and then you say, this is the image that I want to run, this is the command that I want to run against that image or against that container at this specific time. And then there is the one-off job that you can run, which is just, instead of cron job as the kind, it is just job. So yeah, those they're working quite well. I'm actually using a lightweight Alpine image to do all of those things, which has surprised me a little bit, because once you take away the scaffolding of your application and actually use the bare minimum of what you need to do to actually get things to work, it actually becomes simpler because the overheads aren't there. Okay. So I've also fixed a couple of issues around the object storage that we were playing with on Tuesday stream at 6 p.m. This was on YouTube. So youtube.com/howtocodewell. And the reason why I had these issues was because when I was developing this, the object storage, so this is uploading images, so course images, and also uploading the code, the actual project code files to the platform. The way I had done it previously was setting it very sort of strict, hard-coded to the development storage, and I wanted to give a little bit more flexibility as to not only the bucket, the region, but also the access control level of per request. So I've done all those now. That was a bit of a PHP work. We did that on Tuesday, and I finished it off Tuesday evening, very late. But yeah, that's going well. And then on Sunday we started working on the upgrade of. I want to do some upgrades, right? So we started working on the upgrades of the npm packages, and my end goal here is to get things to a point where I can move them to TypeScript. But before I get to that point, there is a couple of phases that I need to work through. One is to actually get npm to the LTS. LTS is 16.15.1? Someone will correct me in the comments, I'm sure. And it's not there yet, so it's only on 16. So there's a couple of minor versions to bump up to. Before we get into that, though, I need to upgrade the packages that I'm currently using. So there's a whole bunch of JavaScript packages that howtocodewell.net uses, and a lot of them are out of date. One of which is TinyMCE. I bumped that up to the latest version of version 6.1.0, I believe. And there was a bunch of issues that I had to work through regarding the end-to-end tests, because I don't know if anything's changed or if it's a timing thing, but the end-to-end tests stopped picking up the content editor for TinyMCE and just refused to work. So I had a lot of failing tests to fix. And I actually downloaded a package that Cypress has, or a plugin developer created for Cypress and TinyMCE, which seems to have fixed that issue, which is good. I'm also using this as a period of time to look at the packages that are currently in play and then remove those that I feel that we don't need. One of which is Jest. So, It's a bit embarrassing to say that I don't have any unit tests for JavaScript, although we don't really have a lot of JavaScript on the front end. It's mostly on the back end in the CMS, which isn't that bad. And so I think Jest was a package that I just installed just because, and I don't need it, so I've removed it. It's always good to try and reduce your dependencies. And the next stage of this is to look at the difference between post CSS and things like less, and because I've got both of them installed, and see if there is a way that I can just use one. I'm probably leaning against post CSS at this stage. I am using things like TinyMC, Tailwind. So yeah, that I'm playing with that and sort of doing a bit of discovery work in the evenings as to what I can not include, right? Whether we go for post CSS or less, what are the advantages, disadvantages? Should we just keep to both of them? Because both packages need to be upgraded. So I'm using this as a period of time to go, hang on a minute, can we do without one? Now, moving back a little bit to the Kubernetes stuff, the next stage of the deployment stages that I'm going to be looking into, and I'll be doing this off stream, is learning the ingress stuff. So learning how to basically map a Kubernetes cluster to a domain, to an endpoint. This is still a little above my head, and I've actually kind of got a very complicated, in my opinion, it's quite a complicated requirement. We have the podcast site, which is howtocodewell.fm, and we have the main site, which is howtocodewell.net. Ideally, I want both of those to run off of the same cluster. So that means somehow I need to have two top-level domains, or two domains that feed into this cluster from a public perspective, and then the cluster knows exactly where to route the requests. So this is sort of this is the next stage of what I'm doing in terms of the DevOpsy kind of world. So I don't know how long that's going to take. Probably a good few evenings to wrap my head around all of that stuff. I have a little bit of news. So we spoke the other week regarding the Dev 1 HP laptop and how I was interested in that. Unfortunately, it's only available in the US, and I made some sort of, I gave my opinion, my initial opinion of it. It's actually, the more I see reviews, the more I actually see, I've seen video reviews now. There's people who actually have the videos up and are showing the models and stuff. It looks really good. It looks super, super nice. And you can charge through USB-C, and there is, you can use a single USB Type-C for display, which is very attractive. Unfortunately, though, it's only available in the US. But there is something that has been teased recently, and that is from StarLabs. So StarLabs has teased out the StarFighter, which is apparently going to have a 4K display, which is awesome. It's going to be a 16 by 9 IPS display, and let's see if we can get some more statistics. They haven't really mentioned a lot, to be fair. They've mentioned that it can have up to 64 gigs of RAM, up to 2 terabytes of storage, and what else? Between 8 to 14 hours of battery life. So that sounds very interesting. I'll be very intrigued to know how heavy this thing is with the 4K display. My reason behind that is because I actually took my laptop. I went walking somewhere, and I took my MacBook Pro, my M1 all singing, all dancing MacBook Pro, and it was so heavy, my back was starting to ache really bad. And I was walking for about half an hour with it in the bag. So if I could have something that is slightly lighter but as powerful, I mean, I know that this StarLabs probably isn't going to be as powerful as this machine, but still, if I could get away with having something that is a little bit more portable, then that would be awesome. And I'm also interested in the display. Like, I want to get something that is sort of Retina, or at least as good as or close to my MacBook Pro. So the next laptop, if it was to ever be Linux, then those are the considerations that I would need. So I/O, display, battery life is usually around 8 hours, which is fine. I'm not, 14 hours of use is probably, too much in my opinion. I don't really care if that goes 14 or 16 or 20, it doesn't matter. Normally the bigger the battery, the heavier it is. So when we get to those kind of numbers, the 8 to 14, you've got to take into account the weight that you're going to be carrying around. So anyway, let's talk about the Kubernetes stuff, right? Because this is a learning journey that I put myself on over the past, say, 3 or 4 months. And there are some things that I've started to learn, some things that have surprised me through this journey. One of which is that, I've got 6 things here. So one of which is that not all managed services are the same, right? So I've played with Kubernetes on both my self-hosted stuff as well as managed services. Managed services, I've used the AWS stuff, I've used Linode, I've used DigitalOcean, and not all managed services are the same, especially when it comes to, say, the level of configuration that you can give on the master nodes, the amount of security that you can apply, the way in which the nodes themselves get updated. Some places give you more access, and that access that they give you means that there's more responsibility. So if you were to go for Kubernetes and you wanted to go for a managed service, just know that not all managed services are the same. They don't give you the same level of management. And also some of these services that I've played with are still in this sort of the rollout period. It's kind of they don't say it's beta, but it kind of feels a bit beta. The features are a little lacking in some of these things. And in some services, they are actually streets ahead of the other services. But at the end of the day, it's still Kubernetes. Okay, so the other one is that the learning curve is ginormous. The learning curve of Kubernetes it's just huge. It's just incredibly large, and if you're not using it every day, it's very easy, or I found it very easy to just sort of have to forget things, and you just have to remind yourself as to why you labeled something as this, or why you've called a service that particular thing, or what is a PVC, or what is this particular service doing. I found that documentation is really important. Your own documentation, I mean, as in to document why you've done it in that way, and also what was the resource that led you into that direction. So, you end up essentially with a bunch of YAML files, and if you were just to look at all those YAML files, you would need to know the structure. You would need to know what is required. What is a dependency of what the other thing is, and without having any kind of documentation, that would be very difficult to just read the YAML files and discover your way around it. I'm sure that a lot of people can do it better than I, but it's kind of like a very weird map of your infrastructure. Another one is that if you can learn Terraform whilst you're doing it, then that's really good, because Terraform goes hand in hand with some of the managed services. So some of the managed services, Linode, DigitalOcean, and AWS, they have their own Terraform counterparts of resources for their clusters. So you can create something that is very can be torn up and torn down very easily, right? So you're not just left with things running and you just can't remember that you've done that apply command and you've just left things running in the cloud. So if you can do everything in a sort of a single set of commands that run a bunch of Kubernetes, build a bunch of Kubernetes resources through Terraform and then apply those, then that is good. I always try and recommend people to try and boil everything down to a very small set of commands. So for example, a deploy.sh or a build.sh, that kind of stuff that do these things, and then you can document those with comments, those commands, and it becomes self-documenting. That's the thing. Kubernetes, I found at this stage at least, isn't self-documenting. Even though it's YAML, to me, it's still very alien. So I read the YAML files, and I'm still none the wiser. I need some documentation alongside to actually tell me what this thing actually does and why it's labeled in that kind of manner, and what happens when I run this command. So yeah, I'm not as so what I'm saying is I'm not as fluent in Kubernetes as I am in, say, Docker. Okay, so the other one is that smaller is better, right? So if you're starting Kubernetes, it's always best to start it with a very small application that I think. Whereas howtocodewell.net is quite a large kind of application in the sense that, well, that's probably not the right term. The application howtocodewell.net isn't actually that large. However, it is a monolith, right? So you've got the CMS, you've got the front end, and you've got the database, all as sort of one kind of thing. And then you've got your cron jobs, and then you've got your other things that happen, other services that kind of run in the single spot. Yes, they're broken up by containers, so you've got a container in development mode, at least for the database, and you've got a container for the actual web stuff, so the web server, and then you've got a container for the queues and all of that jazz. But in terms of breaking up the code into different responsibilities, that really isn't there. So there isn't like, it's not like an API driven headless CMS kind of thing, right? Whereas if it was, it would lean very heavily towards microservices, and microservices is, in my opinion, probably one of the best sort of Kubernetes is kind of like the thing that microservices need. I don't think I would ever be able to use any kind of microservices without having this kind of orchestration system. It'd be very difficult to do that. However, saying this, howtocodewell.net isn't in microservices. So I'm probably using like a sledgehammer to crack a nut. And there's probably people out there going, you don't need Kubernetes for what you're trying to achieve, which is fine. But my plan is to break things up in the future. So, I'm kind of seeing Kubernetes as a kind of the end goal eventually. But if you can start smaller, it's probably easier, because then you would just snap things on together rather than having this monolithic application just running in a container. One of the problems that I've got at the minute that I need to try and solve is that going back to the cron jobs, there is a cron that I haven't yet wired up together, and this is a cron that I want to run a PHP console command. The problem with that is that the console command is embedded in the code base, which has both the front end and the back end in it. And all I want to do is just run this one command. I don't want to spin up a whole container that has the whole website in. I want to ideally have a very lightweight container that just does that one single command. And that'll be my cron job. But in order to do that, I would need to break things into smaller little sections of code and have their own defined boundaries, and probably do API calls between the different containers. See what I mean by it kind of leans itself more towards microservices than it does to what I'm doing. So yeah, there's probably a lot of people out there going, you don't need Kubernetes for what you're trying to achieve. And I get that. I totally get that. And I think that going into this without that blind that blind sort of knowledge that what I'm doing is probably not the best way to actually achieve this, it's not the quickest way to achieve this, is actually a good thing, I think, because then I know what it is that this could be used better for. So I've jumped around these points, but point number 3 was that you don't need it all the time. Kubernetes is not your silver bullet. It's not a solution to every single problem at all. And Kubernetes does make it easier, I guess, for you to break things up into smaller things. It makes it a little bit more obvious as to why you want to break things up into smaller little micro containers. Transparency and monitoring are super, super important. Many times I've had things running on pods that I just don't even know where the pods, I don't even know what container this pod is running on. And it's like, which one do I log into to get the tail of the logs and all of this stuff. So a piece of work, I haven't done this yet, but a piece of work is to have a monitoring system that allows me to actually monitor the logs across the board, and also have things channeling into those logs that are, say, from the cron jobs, and having some way of actually seeing at any one point in time the health of the Kubernetes cluster and the pods and the containers. There's been a couple of times where things have got stuck and I haven't really understood why, and so I've needed to just basically kill the whole thing and restart it. I obviously can't do that when it's in production, so I need to learn where to look. It's kind of I'm still very green and very vanilla with all of this stuff. So there was a period the other week where I was basically jumping in to every single pod, having a look at every single container, just to seeing, and then refreshing the page just to see where I am, like which container is actually producing the log. So yeah. Part of this is for me to also use a third-party monitoring tool such as Sentry. There are others that I could use as well. I also want to have my own Grafana running off of this as well. So I have things in mind for me to gain this level of transparency and monitoring that I think is super, super important. And I think the more I put this off, the more the more I will need it, right? So I think once I get the ingress stuff that I'm dealing with or looking into next, once I get that done, I'm going to start looking into monitoring solutions. So that was it. That was actually 6 points. So smaller is better. It leads to microservices rather than monolithic applications, and it's easier to create Kubernetes clusters around microservices than monoliths, because you end up with a monolith trying to break everything out, which is a good thing in some cases. You don't always need it. That's point number 3. You don't always need it, because sometimes monoliths are actually okay. It's not always the silver bullet, as I mentioned. The learning curve of Kubernetes is ginormous, in my opinion, because you can't just read the YAML and understand it very well. It's not like reading, say, an OpenAPI YAML file. I can read that and understand the requests and the responses and the examples and all of that stuff, and that makes sense to me. But this isn't. This isn't making much. Well, it's starting to, but it's not there yet. It's a very slow burn. Monitoring and transparency. This is point number 5. This is super, super important, and it's best to get this done early. I need to do this. And also that not all managed services such as DigitalOcean, Linode, AWS are not the same. And a point on that, managed services. If you ever try and do Kubernetes on your own, so self-hosted Kubernetes, I did try this. It's mad. Like you think the learning curve is huge now. When you start dealing with self-hosted stuff and you have to deal with user control and all of this stuff that Kubernetes has under the hood, stuff that you won't even appreciate if it's a managed service, there is so much more to Kubernetes when you're dealing with it yourself. So yeah, it's just an incredible amount. Off of the back of this, though, I have started listening to different podcasts that are more DevOps focused. So typically I would listen to things like Coder Radio and other programming related Syntax FM and that kind of stuff podcasts. But recently I've started leaning towards things like DevOps Paradox, self-hosted, and the Linux Action Show, Unfiltered, and all that jazz. So what I'll do is I'll leave those links in the show notes. I'll also leave a link to omgubuntu.co.uk regarding the StarFighter announcement. And also, before I go, there was this little blog post I read earlier, which I thought was quite fun, and that is why isn't the internet more fun and weird? So it's a look back on MySpace, and that is jaredsumner.com code blog. I'll leave a link in the show notes below. So that is my Kubernetes journey so far, and I'll probably do another one, say in another 3 months, maybe 6 months time, and look back at this and see if any of this is getting easier, or maybe if there's anything I've mentioned that I need to rehash or change. My assumptions may have been different. My learning would have hopefully matured, and hopefully we'll be in a better place in terms of, although the build of the deployment stage is going quite well. It's one of those things. I don't have a lot of time playing with it. But anyway, happy coding, everyone. I hope everybody has a great week ahead and a good weekend, and I will see you again soon. Thanks for coding. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Happy coding. Happy coding is what I meant. See you again soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.